All right, this evening, we are going to do an overview of the last three chapters. Now, we're not gonna obviously read all three chapters together, but I just thought there are so many details and they're connected that I would just try to talk through with your observations and your questions, the high spots, you might say, in these last chapters. And then we'll go back for a couple of weeks maybe or more if we need more to unpack them in some detail. So tonight, just going to hit the high spots. Right at the beginning of chapter 10 of the book of Daniel. In the 3rd year of King Cyrus of Persia, a word was revealed to Daniel, who was named Belteshazzar. If you look at chapter 9 at the beginning, it's the 1st year of Darius, son of Ahasuerus. Why are we going back to Cyrus? So we have a time reference and a location reference. Verse 4 of chapter 10. I was standing on the bank of the great river, that is the Tigris. So again, we're being drawn back to an earlier part of the book of Daniel. And one of the commentaries I'm following says we're really meant to sort of start reading chapter 10 and following in light of chapters 1 through 6. Mm-hmm. So some of the challenges they're facing there, exile, for example, in chapter 1, and some form of danger. And so in a kind of linguistic way, we're going back and picking up themes, even though it's not sort of a linear logical argument. We're going back and picking up these images and themes from earlier chapters. Are they having trouble?
No, I think they're in.
Oh, okay.
I mean, I don't know.
All right. All right. Look at chapter 11, verse 33 in Daniel. You see there, they shall fall by sword and flame and suffer captivity and plunder. Mm-hmm. Now that's sort of those are kind of reference points to what happened in chapters 1 through 6. So how do we make sense of that? You know, it's the point that I'm trying to get across is we don't read the book in a linear way that this thing follows that thing because it's in chapter 4 and not chapter 3. We have to think a little bit more in terms of images and themes. And then we have this vision of this man who delivers a word to Daniel and a vision to Daniel. And I thought we ought to just take a second and look at the description of the appearance of this man. He's dressed in linen. So somebody tell me what linen looks like.
White.
It's white. And what else about linen? Is there anything else I should know about linen? Lemon?
Priestly material.
Right.
It's a woven fabric.
Okay, it's woven, all right, and it is Joanne mentioned it's the priestly material. The robes for the priests are made of linen.
And it's also a plant material.
Okay.
Which might have been in that day and age.
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah. It looked to me when I see the vestments of a bishop, for example, like a Catholic bishop. I mean, the material looks very luxuriant somehow. well-made, substantial material. Is that fair about linen?
Yes,
Could be.
Okay. Okay, so we have linen clothing, we have a belt of gold. We have a body like beryl. That's my version uses the word beryl. What does your version use?
same one.
Beryl?
Crystalline.
Chrysolite, okay. Chrysolite is another. So we're in verse 6 now. Chapter 10, verse 6. All right. So beryl comes in different colors, and I had to be careful because a lot of images are copyrighted, so I'm not entirely happy with this image, but you can see beryl can be very golden. It can be pink, and blue and green. You can see those colors there. So his body was like beryl. What does that mean?
Actually, no.
I don't know. I don't know what that means.
Was that one of the? Translucent? That is a little.
Okay, okay, fair enough. And it is one of the gemstones
In the ephod,
in the, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
which then is also repeated in the Revelation.
yeah. Yeah, we'll look at that in just a second. So then a face like lightning. I have a hard time imagining what a face like lightning looks like, because then it goes on to say eyes like flaming torches. I mean, that's a pretty busy face.
And frightening.
Yeah. Terrifying,
Yeah.
yeah. And then arms and legs like burnished bronze. So we have a body like beryl. A precious stone. We have linen, we have gold. When we start putting these colors and images together in our minds, rich, holy, pure, powerful, eyes like lightning, a face like lightning, eyes like flaming torches, arms and legs like burnished bronze. Now, this is the best I could do for burnished bronze. And it doesn't work all that well on the screen, but I think most of us have seen burnished bronze. That's an example of burnished bronze there, an image. And then the sound of the words this person speaks, like the roar of a multitude. Let's go to Revelation 1. Verses 12 through 15. And we'll get an idea of where Revelation gets these images. Then I turned to see whose voice it was that spoke to me, and on turning I saw 7 golden lampstands, and in the midst of the lampstands I saw one like the Son of Man, clothed with a long robe and with a golden sash across his chest. His head and his hair were white as white wool, white as snow. His eyes were like a flame of fire. His feet were like burnished bronze, refined as in a furnace. And his voice was like the sound of many waters. That's not exactly the same, but it is very, very similar. All right, let me ask you now, as you think about the specific details of this vision. So imagine Daniel seeing this kind of person. Back to the details of the description. Linen clothing, belt of gold, body like beryl, face like lightning, eyes like flaming torches, arms and legs like burnished bronze, sound of words like the roar of a multitude. What comes to mind? What does it prompt you to think?
Given the context of all the scripture, it's likely the Son of God or God.
Okay, so is this a manifestation of the eternal Son? Right, if, looking at Revelation, maybe there's a suggestion of, the Son of Man appearing here, because it doesn't call him an angel. He's not Michael.
Right.
Right, so, but clearly he's a supernatural figure. At the very minimum, we can say he's a supernatural figure. And Daniel is now confronted by this figure. So we have in chapter 10 of Daniel, chapter 10, I should have done this at the beginning. Chapter 10 is about Daniel's encounter with this figure and Daniel's response. Chapter 11 is this description of the backs and forths between the king of the south and the king of the north and variations on that theme. And then in chapter 12 is really the final outcome of these kings' efforts and their battles and their attempts to take territory. In the end, God's people are, to put it in a rather lame way, going to be okay. So that's chapter 12, a lot of details there. Chapter 10 is this vision and Daniel's reaction. Chapter 11 is kind of the content of the vision. You might describe it as a sort of vision of history. Not all of history, but certainly of history. It goes past, present, future, right? The opening of chapter 10 harkens us back to an earlier point in the book of Daniel. And so we've got past, present, future kind of unfolding, being laid out in front of us in this very revelatory way. That's chapter 11. Chapter 10, though, is Daniel's reaction. So let's look at specific verses in chapter 10 about how Daniel reacts. So let's start with verses 8 and 9. Would somebody read verses 8 and 9?
I know.
Okay?
So I was left alone and saw this great vision, and no strength was left in me. My radiant appearance was fearfully changed, and I retained no strength. Then I heard the sound of his words, and as I heard the sound of his words, I fell on my face in deep sleep, with my face to the ground.
Okay. So a trance, face down. Is that like I fainted?
No,
Sort of overwhelmed by this experience. I blanched, my face went white, pale, my strength left me.
same thing that John did in the Revelation.
Exactly.
John let his speak.
So here we have, and this is where commentators generally say we have an experience. I'll use the word writer here. The writer has had a real experience of being confronted by God in some way. And now he draws on a stock of known images and ways of saying things to try to put into words that experience. Okay, so 8 and 9, so he's weakened. I remember when I was a little kid, this is one of my earliest memories. We were living in Garnett, Kansas, and I was maybe 3, I don't know. Just playing out in the front yard, and I got a little too close to the curb, and I was still in, on the sidewalk that leads up to the house in our yard, but right at the edge, right by the curb, and this big old cement truck went by, making a lot of noise, these old cement trucks. And I was terrified by that truck, and I just went weak. I couldn't move. I was in no danger, of course, but I didn't know that, it was just a big scary noise that came by. And when I read this, I thought of that feeling of you're so afraid, you're just frozen, you can't move. Okay, verse 11, somebody read verse 11.
Well, again, a hand touched me,
Yeah, thank you, okay, yeah,
set me from.
I should have included that one.
He said, Daniel, you who are highly esteemed, consider carefully the words I am about to speak to you, and stand up, for I have now been sent to you. And when he said this to me, I stood up trembling.
Okay, I stood up, he told me to stand up, I stood up, but I am trembling, right? Good, verses 15 through 17,
I'll read that.
yeah,
While he was saying this to me, I bowed with my face toward the ground and was speechless. Then one who looked like a man touched my lips, and I opened my mouth and began to speak. I said to the one standing before me, I am overcome with anguish because of the vision, my Lord, and I am helpless. How can I, your servant, talk with you, my Lord? My strength is gone and I can hardly breathe.
okay. And then verse 19.
Do not be afraid, O man highly esteemed, he said. Peace, be strong now, be strong. When he spoke to me, I was strengthened and said, Speak, my Lord, since you have given me strength.
Okay, so in this experience, then the one who touches his lips makes it possible for him to speak. And then when the one who touched his lips basically says, be strong, take strength, he feels strengthened. So whoever this person is, it doesn't tell us, but this person has a lot of power.
Yeah.
And is able to help Daniel through this experience. So now let me ask you about these are the details of the experience. What do you think of the weight of that experience? How would you, what stirs in your thinking about Daniel's experience now?
It'd be something you'd never forget.
All right,
Could be life change.
yeah, life-changing. Right,
Although I think fear is probably an appropriate response.
yeah, a kind of terror at the presence of supernatural holiness. Yeah. And another thing, it says this later in chapter 11, but this is an objectively real being experience. It's not simply Daniel having his own sort of phantasm, this is a confrontation by an objectively real supernatural being who's going to show Daniel things about what's to come, but also sort of to help Daniel make sense of the history that they've been living through. So what I'm trying to convey here is the weight of this experience that Daniel has, the content of the vision that he's being shown now, the significance of the words he's hearing, because this being talks to him and says, this is what's happening, and that's what's happening, and all that. So we get a whole chapter basically on this experience. Now, what do you make of these references to the speaker who's been talking to Daniel, to Michael, and to the Prince of Persia? So let's look at 10, 13, and 14. But the prince of the kingdom of Persia opposed me 21 days. So here's another reference to a period of time. We've had some already. We're gonna have some more. The prince of the kingdom of Persia opposed me 21 days. So Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me. And I left him there with the prince of the kingdom of Persia, and have come to help you understand what is to happen to your people at the end of days. For there's a further vision for those days. And then in 2020 and 21. Do you know why I have come to you? Now I must return to fight against the prince of Persia. And when I am through with him, the prince of Greece will come. But I am to tell you what is inscribed in the book of truth. There is no one with me who contends against these princes except Michael, your prince.
And that's Michael, the archangel?
To the best of my knowledge, yes. This is Michael, who is called an archangel. So Michael, who comes from Yahweh's heavenly court. And here, Michael, the archangel, is cast in a kind of military setting. He's fighting against the prince of the kingdom of Persia. How's he doing that? What do you think's going on here? Any ideas?
Well, I suppose somehow Michael gives him ideas or thoughts on how to win war against the guy in the Persian.
Right. Yeah.
Steve,
I couldn't expect that Michael was in there with his own sword, but I suppose he could be.
Yes. Was that Sandy?
yes,
Yeah.
my study Bible says the prince of the kingdom of Persia is one of Satan's emissaries.
Okay. So this is sort of it doesn't really say things explicitly here, but we get this picture of what I'll call battle. And we can think of it as somehow, as we read chapter 11, we're going to look at actual kings and attempts to take territory and battles back and forth. So is there a sense in which Michael somehow is engaged in a kind of in the realm of the supernatural here? Do these forces in chapter 11 represent, this is the study Bible Sandy's using, is interpreting these verses that way, that there's a spiritual realm that's involved in our picture here, but it's so to speak hidden, or it's the spiritual realm, maybe better to say, is embodied in the actual historical events on the ground. Now you can think of a number of New Testament places in the book of Ephesians, for example, when Paul says in chapter 6, our battle is not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers, against the forces of wickedness in the heavenly places. So, for those of us moderns who just kind of see the things in front of us and, we think of the natural world and all that, this is a moment where we're really challenged to kind of move into the possibility of some new awareness about spiritual realities that are very much real, but are not always obvious. Now, again, we can't unpack everything, but as we go forward, today's just hit the high spots. As we go forward, we might come back to that and maybe see what the scholars say about those things. But we have this interesting kind of background to the vision that Daniel has.
Well, I have it's a handwritten note, so I got it, I wrote it sometime when I was studying or in a class about Daniel. And it just says, there is a war going on.
Right. Yeah. Well, I probably will not be able to resist the temptation to comment about something similar to that when we get in a little further into chapter 11. And I know I shouldn't do it, but I probably can't stop myself. So chapter 11, let's do a little breakdown of chapter 11. The first few verses there are an explicit reference to Persian kings. And then we get this lengthy narrative that goes back and forth between the king of the north and the king of the south, or kings of the south, because there are offspring involved here. So verses 5 through 13, it's generally about the kings of the south in ascendance. This is my language. So kind of, getting the upper hand, it appears. And then 14 through 19 in chapter 11, it's the king of the north. And we want to know, well, who are these people, right? What countries? And we're going to look at this as we go forward. But we've got kings of the south in ascendance. We got kings of the north in ascendance. And then we've got this long section on a person who, for many verses, isn't called the king. He's called, in my version, a contemptible person who rules as king, but he doesn't have royal honor or authority. He's some kind of usurper. He steps into, if you look at chapter 11, verse 19, this is about the king of the north. He shall turn back toward the fortresses of his own land, but he shall stumble and fall and shall not be found. It's like, so this king of the north is just kind of taken from the scene. Now we have a power vacuum. And this contemptible person, because the guy in verse 20 doesn't last very long, right? He gets one verse. Then in verse 21, a contemptible person on whom royal majesty has not been conferred. And he gets the rest of the chapter, so far as I can tell. And I did try to, I tried to avoid, I just wanted to see, and I would encourage all of you to do this when you're studying like this, what emerges as you look in the details and try to get a little bit of a structure, what emerges for you. So that's what I did. I didn't yet go to the commentaries on this. I wanted to see what it looked like to me as I just read through this narrative. And it does appear to me that verses 21 through 45 are basically about the same guy. And he's slick. He's deceptive. He buys people off. He uses wealth and gold to gain favor with people and to kind of get them under his thumb. And he's also totally godless, right? I mean, he doesn't care about, like verse 36, the king shall act as he pleases. So we have the Persian kings, we have the king or kings of the south, we have the king of the north, then we have this person. And we'll try to look at some of the details in the future with what's going on in this chapter. Another thing you notice when you read then chapter 11 is all the instability. Now remember, this takes us back to a prior theme about the Babylonians and then the Persians, right? These kingdoms rise and then they fall, they disappear. And I just want us to notice the instability in chapter 11 of these kingdoms. So forgive the kind of this is sort of repetitive maybe, but let's look at chapter 11, verse 4. And while still rising in power, his kingdom shall be broken and divided toward the four winds of heaven. But not to his posterity, nor according to the dominion with which he ruled. Is that a reference to Alexander the Great? Because his kingdom broke into four. And it wasn't his son that became king, right? Is that a reference to Alexander the Great? We'll see. But that kingdom breaks up and doesn't continue as a kind of family dynasty. Verse 5. Then the king of the south shall grow strong, but one of his officers shall grow stronger than he, and shall rule a realm greater than his own realm. Now imagine being the king of the south, one of your military commanders somehow manages to gain power and winds up more powerful than you. So now you're still the king, but you're afraid of this guy.
That's a coup.
Yeah, yeah, or the threat of a coup. I mean, it's. Okay, now look at verse 6. After some years, they shall make an alliance. And the daughter of the king of the south shall come to the king of the north to ratify the agreement. But she shall not retain her power, and his offspring shall not endure. Again, who are we talking about here? That's what we want to know. Who are we talking about? But the text is actually drawing our attention to these people are trying really hard to maintain power, and it's not working.
Well, kings come and kings go.
Right. Right. And nations come and nations go. Now, here's another thing I want to point out. When you read through chapter 11, I want you to notice the word shall. In my version, New Revised Standard, it's shall, just used repetitively. Now, what's going on here? It's a stronger sense than future indicative. In other words, the vision isn't simply saying it's going to happen this way. It's saying it will happen that way with a certainty. Well, how's that going to happen? It begs the question, all right, who's in control here? What's going on? Shall, all the way through chapter 11, as the person tells Daniel this vision, he uses the word shall repeatedly. Now look at verses 14 and 15. In those times, many shall rise against the king of the south. The lawless among your own people shall lift themselves up in order to fulfill the vision, but they shall fail. Then the king of the north shall come and throw up siege works and take a well-fortified city, and the forces of the south shall not stand, not even his picked troops, for there shall be no strength to resist. Now we have this really interesting thought that God sovereignly is bringing about his will through these very human battles. But the Bible does not teach that God is a lever puller and that we don't have agency. We have choice. We can say yes or no, right? So this is something that's hard to keep in mind, I think, or to keep together, maybe is better to say. God is sovereign and humans are responsible for their actions. We're not little puppets or robots. And yet here in these major forces of history, God is in charge. All right, let's see, verse 17. He shall set his mind to come with the strength of his whole kingdom, and he shall bring terms of peace and perform them. In order to destroy the kingdom, he shall give him a woman in marriage, but it shall not succeed or be to his advantage. So now we have two cases of trying to develop diplomatic relations through the giving of a daughter. This case, it says a woman.
Mine says daughter.
Does it say daughter? Okay, I'm not sure why mine does it, but so, and you can imagine, this is a common occurrence where two kingdoms forge their alliance through marriage. And this, this is happening all through European history. Just think of the Habsburg Empire, right? Okay, verse 19.
Okay.
Then he shall turn back toward well, let me back up and say, take the Hanovers, right? Take the British throne. I mean, they're connected to the Germans and the Habsburg Empire, German, Spanish, Dutch. I mean, they were so, the monarchs of those countries. So it's the Dutch king, but he's married, he's related to the German Habsburg, right?
Yeah.
Okay, verse 19. Then he shall turn back toward the fortresses of his own land, but he shall stumble and fall and shall not be found. And then verse 45, this contemptible guy who gets a lot of attention in chapter 11, look what happens to him, the very last verse in this chapter. He shall pitch his palatial tents between the sea and the beautiful holy mountain. Now I cheated. I looked at a number of commentaries on this, and it's interesting. You get the holy mountain is Mount Zion, Jerusalem.
Oh, yeah.
The sea is the Mediterranean Sea. But these are like 19th century and maybe early 20th century commentators kind of have, they've got lots of different locations for that beautiful holy mountain, not Mount Zion. So again, we'll have to look at that. But the point is, for our king now, yet he shall come to his end with no one to help him. So his kingdom ends with him all by himself. Makes me think of the Seals and Crofts song, I'm the king of nothing.
That's an ageism. We won't go there.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Okay, the New King James Version calls this contemptible person a vile person, to whom they shall not give the honor of royalty. So I want to ask us to think, how does the contemptible person without royal authority rule? How did he pull this off? I think we're invited to imagine this. How does he work his way into this kind of power? What do people like him do?
They are
I mean,
devious, they are
Sorry?
heart,
Say it again, Linda.
they are devious and heartless and not afraid to kill anybody that gets in their way. They're liars. They tell people what they want to tell them, what people want to hear, whether it's true or not.
Yeah,
They're
so
just-
deceit,
Totally immoral.
yeah. Deceit,
Yes.
threat, bribery. I mean, this guy could be a mafioso. Right?
Well, Putin comes to mind.
Putin, did you say? Putin?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I do think Putin fancies himself as sort of like an old Russian czar.
Oh, yeah. It's all about honor, shame.
Yeah,
He wants
yeah,
the honor of the old kingdom.
right. That's why he wants Ukraine so much.
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, so. When I read that, I just, I was thinking of present political circumstances in a lot of different ways, but it's sort of shocking, because I do think we've gotten to the point where, pretty much out in the open, some leaders use these tactics without really trying to cover up, you know? We know these tactics have been around for a long time, but I think it was true that they wanted to look sincere and honest and above board, and they wanted to present a certain image to the public to gain trust and to sort of hold on to trust. They were willing behind the scenes to make deals, pull shenanigans, and all that. Okay. Verse 31, I mentioned this already. The king shall rule. Sorry, verse 36. My mistakes, verse 36. The king shall rule as he pleases. And that's why I put with money, bribes, strategic worship of powerful, not the traditional deity. So if you read down through there, you can see he has no respect for the local gods. In this case, it's the God, it's Yahweh, right?
Mhm.
No respect for deities. Why is that? Because he is God.
Right.
Now, verses 31 and 32. Forces sent by him shall occupy and profane the temple and fortress. Based on what we've read already, let me go ahead. They shall abolish the regular burnt offering and set up the abomination that makes desolate. So we've run into this before, back in chapter 8. And I'm pretty confident that the scholars I'm following to do this study are going to say that's Antiochus IV again. This is Antiochus Epiphanes, God manifest, right? What is the Holy Covenant? This is that phrase is used a handful of times, maybe about 3 or 4 times in chapter 11.
Would be the Mosaic covenant, wouldn't it?
Yeah, or maybe, or just generally the covenant relationship between God and God's people, I think. So that's an interesting way to frame it, right? This king's attack is against that covenant, that relationship.
Well, and we know that kings, rulers, whoever are put there and allowed there by God. So that's a covenant, whether they want it to be or not.
Right, yeah, right. But all the way through the Old Testament, we see this problem that God's people wander away from that covenant relationship, right? They're called to be faithful, and Daniel, this book is calling them to be faithful, just like Revelation calls people to be faithful. Persevere, right? The one who endures to the end will be saved. So this king's action is attacking the relationship that these people have with God. Not exactly attacking God per se, but attacking that relationship. And I've been thinking some about how faithfulness to God gets challenged by cultural forces, just generally. What cultural forces are working among us now that want to seduce us? That word gets used in chapter 12. So against the Holy Covenant, against the relationship. And then the time of the end. This gets mentioned several times. Verse 14, verse 35, verse 40. The time of the end. Doesn't say when, right? Is this the final end, right? I think most people tend to interpret it as the end of all time, right? And when we get to chapter 12, we can kind of see why. Think about that, but does it just mean the time of the end of this period of history when God's people are going through such turmoil in the Seleucid Empire? So that's a question we're gonna have to look at. To what does the end refer?
Well, and it could be, and I hate to go back to the Revelation, but it could be many ends, can refer to multiple ends.
Right,
Now, that doesn't mean there won't be an end,
exactly,
but kingdoms come
Yeah.
and kingdoms come.
right. Right, and this is such a good reminder, right, that there can be numerous ends and there can be numerous fulfillments of prophecy. That doesn't mean the prophecy is like a wax nose that you can just bend to whatever point you want to make it, right? These have definite reference points, but they don't have to be just one.
Yeah.
Which is a good, yeah, Linda.
The last verse of Daniel, where it says, "But you go your way till the end, and you shall rest, and you shall stand in your allotted place at the end of the days," almost sounds like he's talking about, okay, this is all going to happen after you die. Life will go on, but this takes you up to when you're going to die.
Right,
That's what it's.
yeah. Okay, then I want us to notice the two groups of God's people mentioned in chapter 11, in those verses 32 through 35. One group are seduced by the system
Mhm.
and they violate the covenant.
I thought it's interesting that they compromise. They compromise going on.
Yeah, right. Right. And there's another group, loyal to God, who resist those pressures, but it says some of them may fall.
Mhm. But
But the wise, and these words are repeated twice, here and then in chapter 12. The wise will be refined, purified, and cleansed. Now, how are those words alike and how are they different?
Well, refining leads to purification, doesn't it? Like in gold and silver, when they refine it,
Yeah,
that takes
seems like it.
the stuff and it's purified into a pure metal.
Right, yeah.
So
Something-
refining would be the process,
Yeah,
purified would be the results of the process.
right. I think the use of three different words, but sort of repeating the same idea. I think this is a Hebraism. It's an example of repetition is for emphasis.
Mhm.
But again, in the context of Daniel, here's a promise that you stay faithful to God. You may go through real difficulties. You may stumble and fall, but if you'll keep your eye on Yahweh and do your best to follow him, the experience itself, he will use to make you whole. Okay, let's get into chapter 12 and land the plane.
In 7 minutes.
Yeah, no problem. Here we have Michael again. Says he arises. The protector of your people shall arise. There's a time of anguish. But, so verse 1, great anguish the world has never before witnessed. This is a characteristic of apocalyptic language. It's extremely big. Exaggerated, but not in the sense of falsifying, exaggerated. It's big, it's exaggerated to try to match the magnitude of the thing we're looking at. Verse 1, the deliverance of God's people. At that time, whenever this time is, and they're gonna ask, well, how long is it gonna be before that time, right? At that time, your people shall be delivered. Everyone who's found written in the book. This shows up in Revelation, right? And then in verse 2, here we have the resurrection. This is the first biblical mention of resurrection. The Pharisees believed in the resurrection, the Sadducees did not. The resurrection from the dead marked the end of days, marked the day of the Lord, the end of days. When Christ rose from the dead, it blew everyone's mind. Because it seemed like, wait a minute, we're not ready for that yet. Okay, verse 3. So after this purification, the wise shall shine like the brightness of the sky, and those who lead many to righteousness will shine like the stars. So again, we're getting this picture of a people having gone through the fires, have gone through exile, have gone through these terrible things, staying faithful to God. They come out of it refined and look at the outcome of their lives. And then it says, seal the book. Verse 4. Okay, all this vision, all this, my goodness, Daniel's just probably about to explode. Okay, close the book. We're not going to tell anybody about this. Daniel, you get to see this, right? That's what the man told him at the beginning. You get to see this. You're favored. I'm going to show you something, but it's not yet to be shared. Again, that seal the book is a characteristic of apocalyptic literature. So again, in the book of Revelation, when the book is brought to the Lamb who is slain and is worthy to open the book, he's the one who breaks open the seals. He unseals the book. And there's, a lot of interesting how that connects what's going on in the book of Daniel with what happens in the book of Revelation. Verse 6, how long? Well, this is how long? A time, times, and half a time.
Okay.
What does that mean? And then in verse 11, 1,290 days. From the time that the regular burnt offering is taken away and the abomination that desolates is set up, there shall be 1,290 days. So we're going to try to unpack these numbers as best we can. But
You have the very same thing in Revelation 6, it's the seals.
exactly.
How long, O Lord,
Yep.
how long?
Yep.
I
That's
mean, these
exactly
are
right.
the saints under the altar.
Right.
They're still,
Still waiting. Yep. My attempt to be slightly humorous, verse 8, I can imagine Daniel saying, but wait, seal the book. Wait a minute. What do these things mean? Right? Give me the interpretation.
Which is interesting because Daniel had that gift to interpret.
Right, but this is so far beyond. See, this is nothing like, those other things were great, but this is so far beyond. Again, that's the kind of literature we're reading. I think is designed to cause us to think this is really beyond anything we can imagine. It's real. We don't know how to describe it. So he wants the interpretation, but that's when what Linda shared earlier, verse 13, the end of the book, you go your way and rest. Rest, doesn't mean go take a nap. It means relax. God's got this, right? Your job is to persevere in faithfulness.
one wonders though, why this vision was given to Daniel. He
Right,
gets the vision, he sees certainly heavenly beings, perhaps the Christ, the Messiah. And then he says, but don't worry about it, don't worry.
Yeah. Yeah, because, I think of something like, because Daniel, you're not responsible to carry this out, right? I've shown you this, you've been faithful, and I'm gonna favor you with sharing this with you. Because, eventually, when the time is right, what you have seen will be shared, it will be revealed for prosperity. And it will fit with other prophetic visions and whatnot, understandings of history that have been shared. You just relax, you be faithful, and at the end of days, you will have your reward when you rise. You shall rise for your reward at the end of days. So it's again, we're gonna go back now and in as some detail, look at, parts of these more closely, but so chapter 10 is about the vision and Daniel's reaction to it, to characterize just how big and powerful and awesome and overwhelming the vision is. Chapter 11 is the content of what Daniel has told to him. And then chapter 12 is really the call to be faithful to Yahweh in the midst of struggle, suffering, affliction, tribulation, right? This is one of the reasons, not to get too far ahead of myself here, but it's one of the reasons the idea about the rapture and the tribulation, the way it's often described, I think doesn't work. These are saints who go through the tribulation. Now, again, there's the dispensationalists can explain that, and so I'm not gonna press really hard, but they're certainly going through the tribulation here, the affliction. So I think saints, faithful, godly people can expect difficulty, trouble, and sometimes severe, right? We've been very fortunate in this country, I think fortunate. We haven't had to worry about this much, but now we're getting to the point. Imagine being Jewish right now on a college campus in this country. Now, again, I always want to try to qualify and be clear. So people have the right to protest. If they disagree with something, they have the right to protest. But the overt acts of anti-Semitism are kind of shocking. I mean, where people are actually saying Jews ought to die, right? We need another Holocaust. Things like that. Who would have ever thought that would be happening in our country? But it is. So faithful people have to persevere and hold steady. Okay, I'll end that sermon, excuse me. Any final thoughts? Okay, we will see you next week, and we'll just go back now, kind of start working through some of these. We'll probably spend most of our time in chapter 11, not go back so much to chapter 10, because we know what's going on there, but we'll look at some of the details in chapters 11 and 12. And we will see you next week.
Hey, Steve.
Yeah.
And what's after that?
Well, what's after that is what this group tells me is going to be after that.
Oh, man, okay.
So we'll have to be thinking about that.
Okay.
What do you want to do next? I have an idea or two, but I'll save it for later.
Okay.
We'll see ya.